So today I wanted to talk about something that I find to be extremely important, especially with handheld gaming devices like the Steam Deck and Nintendo Switch, and that is micro SD cards. Now I recently got a 2TB SanDisk Extreme micro SD card for my Steam Deck OLED, and that's really nothing to boast about because the thing was $200. But something like a 2TB on a handheld PC device like the Steam Deck can only hold about 60 to 70 games depending on the size of the game, especially if you're downloading from Steam. As of right now, games aren't exactly optimized for a handheld like Steam Deck even 3 years later. But for a handheld like the Nintendo Switch, I managed to use a 1TB SD card, and that managed to get me 145 games on the Nintendo Switch, and that's just 1TB. And the internal memory on this is 32 gigabytes, like the standard default Nintendo Switch. But on the Steam Deck, I have a total of 3 terabytes, 1 terabyte inside of the Steam OLED itself, and a 2TB SD card, and that only managed to get me around 140 games. So you see the difference. So the magnitude of these games definitely vary depending on the quality of the game. If you want games to run at 1080p, it's probably going to be around 5 to 10 gigabytes more per game. So when it comes to talking about something like the Nintendo Switch 2, those games are most likely going to be at minimum 10 gigabytes. And Nintendo's only offering 245 gigs with the Nintendo Switch 2. Now that's kind of an alarming number. I don't like only having 256 gigabytes in a system that can supposedly play games like Cyberpunk 2077. This game alone, on the PC version, is only 61 gigabytes. And I feel like if the Nintendo Switch 2 version wasn't using any 4K textures or extra graphics like that for its docked mode, then possibly you could shave off an extra 30 gigabytes from the game, but I doubt the game is going to be under 30 gigs. If anything, we're shooting for 50. So to have only 256 gigabytes in the Nintendo Switch and only available on microSD Express cards for $80, that's going to be a huge ask. Sony had a similar ask for the PlayStation Vita. Now, a lot of things for the PlayStation Vita were proprietary, but if you're just going to throw Express microSD cards into the mix, Nintendo might as well just have a proprietary memory unit that they create on their own that's slightly cheaper than $80. I think $80 for 256 gigs is ridiculous. And as you can see, I'm using a 1 terabyte on my Nintendo Switch Lite. And these games, for the most part, are tiny. But when we're going to the territory of actual handheld consoles, like the Steam Deck, where it can actually play games how they were intended to be played, the games run a little bigger. Let's just go to a simple game like Batman Arkham Origins. This game is 27 gigs. Now, this can be shaved down to 15 gigs, especially if Nintendo optimizes their titles. But even if you shave all of these games down to 10 or 15 gigabytes, that's only about 10 or 15 games on your Nintendo Switch 2. That'll only last you about 2 months. So to ask for $80 for 256 gigabytes of an Express micro SD card is huge. I think it's even a bigger ask than Sony did. So if you plan on playing games like Days Gone, well then tough luck. You're only going to have about 500 and change gigabytes to play any game that you want. I think having a minimum of internal space of 500 gigabytes is enough. But for some reason, Nintendo is endorsing these micro SD Express cards, and they're probably going to get a little cut from it. So I am not a fan of the 256 gigs. That is going to be the default memory of the base model of the Nintendo Switch 2. Of course, it's not as small as the 32 gigs, but even back then, 32 gigs was unacceptable. And 64 gigs was nice, but it's only going to serve you well to take screenshots and hold your save data. And nobody even knows what kind of software the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to use. If they're going to compile shaders similar to the Steam Deck, I'd assume they would compile shaders or install inside of the internal memory to some extent. But who knows? And the fact that Nintendo is releasing one of the biggest games out there on day one, those micro SD cards are going to age fast. But yeah, what do you guys think about the 256 gigabyte storage in the Nintendo Switch 2? I remember having 256 on the Steam Deck. Of course, again, this is not the same thing because Nintendo is going to optimize and shrink the games specifically for their handheld. So we might see something like Dead Rising 3 for only 5 gigabytes. Because you know that Nintendo has the capabilities to shrink a game like Resident Evil 2 and compact it to only 64 megabytes. Nintendo is famous for impossible ports, and I feel like they're going to have a ton of impossible ports and optimization. Maybe they're going to compress the games, but I wouldn't count on it, because if they were going to do that, then they would sell a lot more cartridges with the game stored inside. provide, but it's only going to provide a key so you can download the game online. So my assumption, Nintendo is only going to optimize the games for their exclusives, and when it comes to third-party games, they might not do it so much. So we might see some good memory compression and optimization with Cyberpunk 2077, but I don't think Nintendo could keep it up for too long. That is a lot of manpower for every single game that is eventually going to release on the Nintendo Switch 2. But yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a good one. Later.